The restaurant was a place that felt like it belonged in a dream. The lights were soft but bright enough to make every detail shine. The tables gleamed under perfectly polished surfaces, and the air was filled with a mix of laughter, quiet conversations, and the gentle clinking of cutlery. People came here not just for the food, but for the experience, for the feeling that they were stepping into a world that was just a little bit above ordinary life. Tonight, it was busier than usual, with waiters and waitresses moving carefully, but quickly between tables, balancing trays stacked high with delicate plates, trying to give each guest the attention they deserved. Among the staff, one young waitress stood out, not because of anything flashy, but because of the quiet determination in her movements. She had been working at the restaurant for several years, and over time, she had learned how to handle almost any situation without losing her calm. She had a way of smiling just enough to seem friendly while staying firm when she needed to. Her eyes were always alert, noticing small details that could make a big difference, like when a glass needed refilling or a plate needed replacing before anyone even asked. She wasn't new to dealing with difficult customers, but she had a feeling tonight might be different. At a large table near the center of the room, a man had just been seated with several companions. He carried an air that immediately made people notice him. It wasn't just the expensive suit or the watch that sparkled under the lights. It was something in the way he moved, the way he expected the world to adjust around him. He was a billionaire, known in the city for his wealth, his sharp mind, and, unfortunately, for his quick temper. Many people had heard stories about him, how he could yell at anyone who didn't meet his expectations. The restaurant staff had been warned, but warnings didn't always make these encounters easier. The waitress approached the table with a steady step, her notebook in hand. She greeted them warmly, offering menus with a calm smile. The billionaire's eyes swept over her, a mix of curiosity and impatience flashing for just a moment before he turned his attention to the menu. She tried to catch his gaze, giving a polite nod, but he barely acknowledged her presence. The rest of the guests at the table chatted quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing up at the staff as if to make sure they were being served correctly. As she took their order, everything seemed to go smoothly at first. She asked questions, politely, double-checking the details to ensure nothing would be wrong. The billionaire responded tersely, his words clipped, but at least he was clear. She scribbled down the order, repeating it back carefully. Once she confirmed everything, she stepped away, moving gracefully to the kitchen to relay the request. Minutes passed, and the atmosphere at the table began to change. The billionaire tapped his fingers on the table, his eyes narrowing as he looked around, clearly annoyed. When she returned with the first drinks, he waved her over immediately. His voice, loud and sharp, cut through the soft background music and the quiet hum of conversation. "This is not what I ordered," he said, his tone carrying anger. "Are you even paying attention?" The words were harsh, direct, and loud enough that nearby tables could hear. Other guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether to look or pretend they hadn't heard. The staff nearby froze for a moment, recognizing the warning signs of an escalation. The waitress remained standing, holding the tray with steady hands, her face calm but alert. She listened carefully, knowing that reacting too quickly could make things worse, but also understanding that ignoring the situation wasn't an option. "I'm very sorry, sir," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Let me take this back and make sure it's exactly how you want it." She carefully lifted the drink from the table, moving back toward the kitchen, all while keeping her composure. Every step was measured, not rushed, not hesitant. The other staff members watched her, admiration hidden behind anxious expressions. They knew it was a test of patience and skill, one that could go badly if not handled just right. When she returned with the corrected order, she approached the table again. She set the drinks down carefully, making sure each glass was placed exactly where it should be. The billionaire's eyes darted between the drinks and her face, a flicker of impatience still lingering. He leaned forward slightly, his voice rising again as he began criticizing the next part of the order. He picked apart every small detail, from the temperature of the water to the way the ice cubes clinked against the glass. Each comment was sharper than the last, designed not just to correct, but to embarrass. Despite the rising tension, the waitress stayed calm. She nodded respectfully, her face showing understanding, and replied briefly, acknowledging his concerns without arguing. She could feel the eyes of the other diners on them, the weight of everyone watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Some of the guests at nearby tables whispered to each other, sharing quiet speculation about how the situation might unfold. There was a sense that this was no ordinary complaint. This was a test of nerves and character, and everyone could feel the stakes. She remembered a piece of advice her mentor had once given her. Sometimes, the best way to handle anger was not to fight fire with fire, but to be the calm in the storm. She reminded herself to breathe, to think before speaking, and to use words carefully. Every movement, every sentence had to be precise. One wrong step could make the billionaire angrier, but a well-timed response could shift the entire room. The billionaire's associates tried to intervene, offering quiet suggestions and trying to smooth over the tension. He waved them off, insisting that he was handling it himself. The manager, standing nearby, gave the waitress a subtle nod, signaling that she should continue to handle the situation calmly. She felt a mix of anxiety and determination. She had dealt with difficult customers before, but this was different. This was someone used to power and control, someone who expected people to bend to his will without question. And yet, she also felt a quiet confidence. She had faced challenges before, and had always managed to find a way through them. Not, as the minutes ticked by, the atmosphere in the restaurant grew heavier. The soft music seemed distant, the clinking of glasses less noticeable. Everyone's attention was drawn to this central table. Diners who had been enjoying their meals now found themselves watching, curious and tense. The staff moved carefully, aware that any sudden action could change the mood completely. Even the other waitresses and waiters were paying close attention, ready to assist if needed, but also learning from the calm and focused way their colleague handled the pressure. The waitress approached the table one more time, preparing to take the next order. She moved with confidence, her steps measured, her hands steady. She greeted the billionaire politely, her voice clear and respectful. The billionaire looked at her, his expression a mix of irritation and surprise, perhaps noticing for the first time that she was not reacting the way he expected. He expected fear, or at least hesitation, but what he saw instead was calm composure and a quiet determination. He said something sharp, but she didn't flinch. She simply listened, nodded, and responded briefly, her tone measured. It was in this moment, standing there with the eyes of the entire restaurant on her, that the waitress felt a sense of clarity. She understood that she had a choice. She could let his anger control the situation, or she could choose her words carefully and change the dynamic entirely. It was a delicate balance, one that required courage, intelligence, and self-control. She took a deep breath, preparing herself for the moment when she would respond, knowing that her next words could make all the difference. The tension was high, the air thick with anticipation, and the story of this evening was just beginning to unfold. The restaurant was quieter than before, but only in the sense that the background noise seemed to fade beneath the tension surrounding the central table. The billionaire had leaned back slightly in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he watched the waitress approach. Every movement she made was slow and deliberate, carrying a confidence that he did not expect. She could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy and sharp, but she refused to let it intimidate her. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay calm, and to focus on the details she could control. She began by checking on his order, making sure that everything was exactly as he had requested. Her voice was soft, polite, and unshakable. She asked if anything else was needed, and she waited patiently for a response. He sighed impatiently, tapping his fingers on the table, clearly frustrated. He spoke sharply, listing several complaints about the temperature of the food and the speed of service. He expected her to react with nervousness or apology beyond reason, but she stayed composed, acknowledging each point without arguing. Around them, the atmosphere in the restaurant was heavy. Other diners had turned their attention subtly toward the table, curious and tense. Staff members moved carefully around the floor, aware that any wrong step could escalate the situation further. The manager stood nearby, observing quietly, knowing that the moment could either explode into chaos or be diffused by the skill and composure of the waitress. The waitress remembered all the situations she had faced before angry customers. Unreasonable demands and high-pressure moments, but this was different. The billionaire's anger sea. A ride await that went beyond simple frustration. It demanded respect and compliance, and it was clear that he was testing her. But instead of fear, she felt a growing determination. She understood that her response in this moment could not just serve the table, but also show that dignity and patience were powerful tools, even in the face of intimidation. As she moved back to the side of the table, she noticed the subtle reactions of the diners. A few were leaning slightly forward, intrigued by the interaction. Some of the staff had paused their tasks to watch, admiring the calm manner in which she handled the situation. Even the billionaire's associates seemed slightly unsettled, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. It was as if the restaurant had shifted around them, all attention drawn to this unfolding drama. The waitress took a moment to steady herself. She considered her next steps carefully, realizing that what she said and how she said it would determine the tone for the rest of the evening. She could see the impatience and superiority in the billionaire's eyes, and she knew that trying to argue or justify herself would only fuel his anger. Instead, she focused on the simple truth. She had done her best, and she would continue to do so with respect and confidence. She moved closer and spoke again, her voice carrying clearly without aggression. She acknowledged the issues he had raised and explained briefly how she would correct them, showing professionalism and care. She didn't over-apologize or make excuses. Her tone suggested that mistakes were natural, but could be addressed efficiently. The billionaire's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He hadn't expected someone to respond without panic or defensiveness. It was a subtle change, but it didn't go unnoticed by the other diners. The waitress continued to check on the order, making sure that every dish, drink, and detail met the standards. She moved with a quiet confidence, balancing the tray without any hint of hesitation. The billionaire continued to mutter under his breath, his voice low but audible enough to keep her alert. She remained composed, listening carefully, her eyes focused on the tray and the table, aware of every movement and word. Around them, whispers and glances began to circulate among the diners. Some exchanged looks of admiration for her poise, while others were simply curious about how the situation would unfold. The staff felt a mixture of anxiety and respect. They had seen difficult customers before, but this was on another level. The waitress's calm determination had created a sense of anticipation in the room, a feeling that something significant was about to happen. She returned to the kitchen momentarily, relaying the adjustments to the chefs and making sure that everything would be perfect. The team worked efficiently, aware that the spotlight was on this table and that the waitress's approach had shifted the dynamic. When she brought the corrected orders back to the table, she placed each item carefully, ensuring everything was exactly as requested. She spoke politely, confirming that everything was now correct, and awaited the billionaire's response. The billionaire's eyes scanned the table, his voice still carrying irritation, but there was a noticeable pause. He seemed momentarily caught off guard by the calm and professionalism she displayed. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming on the table, and she waited patiently, maintaining eye contact without confrontation. The associates at the table exchanged subtle glances, clearly sensing the tension in the air. She could feel the shift, small but real. The air around the table was different now. Instead of fear or submission, she carried a quiet authority that made the billionaire hesitate. The room seemed to hold its breath as she spoke briefly, acknowledging the corrections and maintaining a friendly yet firm demeanor. The words were simple, clear, and deliberate, carefully chosen to avoid anger but assert respect. The waiter nearby whispered a quiet comment to a colleague, noting how impressively calm she remained under pressure. Other staff members nodded subtly, inspired by her ability to manage the situation without escalating it. Even some of the diners at nearby tables seemed to relax slightly, sensing that the immediate tension might be easing. Despite this, the billionaire was still clearly agitated. His words were sharp and impatient, pointing out minor imperfections and expressing dissatisfaction with how things had been handled. Yet the waitress did not flinch. She listened carefully, nodded politely, and responded calmly. Her tone suggested understanding and competence rather than fear or submission. She began to feel a quiet sense of control. While he was powerful and wealthy, his anger was no longer dictating the atmosphere completely. Her calm composure was creating a ripple effect, subtly influencing the room and the people within it. The staff moved more confidently around her. The diner's curiosity was tinged with respect, and even the associates at the table seemed to pause, reconsidering their approach. As the minutes passed, the billionaire's voice rose again, but this time, the impact of his words seemed diminished. The waitress had shifted the energy in the room. Instead of creating fear or tension that overwhelmed the space, she had introduced calm and focus, showing that confidence and professionalism could withstand even the sharpest criticism. She took another deep breath, preparing herself for the moment when she would need to respond more directly. She knew that the next step could define the encounter, and she was ready. She looked at the billionaire, her gaze steady and confident, signaling without words that she would handle the situation with grace. The other diners and staff could sense it too, and the anticipation in the room grew. The waitress understood that this was not just about taking orders or serving food. It was about maintaining dignity and composure in a high-pressure situation. She had managed to hold her ground, and now the challenge was to navigate the moment when words alone would determine how the rest of the evening unfolded. She felt a quiet determination, knowing that patience, clarity, and courage would guide her. The room, filled with the soft hum of activity, seemed to focus on her, waiting for the next move in a situation that had become far more than a simple dining experience. The restaurant felt like it had taken a deep breath and held it. Every movement, every sound seemed magnified, as if the walls themselves were listening. The billionaire's sharp gaze tracked every motion of the waitress, trying to anticipate her next word, her next action. He was used to controlling people with his presence, with his voice, with the fear that naturally followed his wealth. But this woman moved through his storm with a calm that seemed almost impossible, and he couldn't figure out how to shake her. The waitress stood just a few feet away, her posture straight, her hands steady even as the tray she carried was loaded with plates and glasses. She could feel the weight of the entire restaurant on her shoulders, not in a way that scared her, but in a way that reminded her that this was a defining moment. She remembered everything she had been taught: patience, clarity, courage, and the power of measured words. She understood that one wrong response could make the billionaire angrier, while one careful sentence could change everything. He waved a hand impatiently, pointing to a small imperfection on one of the plates. His voice carried across the room, loud enough that nearby tables paused to listen. "How do you expect people to pay for this if you can't even get the simplest things right?" His words were sharp, and the tone was cutting. It was meant to embarrass, to remind her and everyone else of the social gap between them. The waitress nodded slightly, acknowledging his words, but she didn't respond with fear or anger. Instead, she tilted her head just enough to show she was listening, taking a deep breath before she opened her mouth. She chose her words carefully, knowing that the right combination of honesty and poise could neutralize his attack. "I understand your concern," she said in a calm, clear voice. "But I also believe that respect is what makes people want to return here, not just perfection on a plate." Her eyes met his directly, steady, and unwavering. The room seemed to pause. Nearby diners stopped mid-bite, and the staff froze in place, sensing that something significant had just been said. The billionaire's expression shifted slightly. His surprise was evident. He hadn't expected her to speak like this. There was a quiet murmur around the restaurant as the words sank in. Some diners exchanged glances, impressed by her confidence. Others whispered softly, intrigued by the way she had addressed a man who normally commanded submission with a single glance. Even the staff, who had been watching anxiously, felt a spark of admiration for her courage. The room was charged with a new energy, one of respect and tension combined. The billionaire leaned back, his fingers tapping on the table, trying to regain the control he was used to having. He opened his mouth to respond, likely to assert his dominance further. But the words didn't come as easily as they usually did. Her calm, measured tone had created a small pause in his rhythm, a hesitation that he was unaccustomed to. For the first time in many years, someone had met his sharpness with composure rather than fear. She continued, carefully navigating the conversation. "I want everything to be right for you and your guests, and I promise I will do my best. But treating people with kindness and patience matters too. That's what makes a place truly special." Her words were simple, but they carried weight, cutting through the arrogance without aggression. The silence that followed was powerful. Everyone could feel the subtle shift in energy, as if the power dynamic had been rearranged in that single moment. The billionaire's associates shifted in their seats, glancing at each other nervously. They were used to him being the undisputed authority in any situation. Yet here was someone challenging him, not with anger, but with calm intelligence. The other diners watched with growing anticipation, realizing that they were witnessing a rare confrontation where courage met power head-on. The staff exchanged quiet nods, understanding that this waitress had turned a potentially humiliating encounter into a demonstration of dignity and skill. The waitress took a careful step forward, her eyes still locked on his, her voice steady. "I know you expect the best, and I aim to deliver that. But I also know that everyone makes mistakes, and handling them with grace makes life better for everyone." Her words were deliberate, spoken slowly so that every listener could catch the meaning. It was not defiance in a rude sense, but an assertive stand that demanded acknowledgement. The billionaire's face showed a flicker of emotion, something between shock and reluctant admiration. He was used to bending people to his will with intimidation, but here was someone who refused to bend, who refused to be cowed by his wealth or anger. His voice, which usually carried unquestioned authority, faltered for a moment. The tension in the room thickened as all eyes remained fixed on the interaction. She felt a quiet surge of confidence. She was standing firm, maintaining her professionalism while also asserting a principle that had guided her for years. Respect is earned, and courage is powerful. The staff around her moved slightly with relief, sensing that the moment of reckoning had arrived. The diners leaned forward, silent but captivated, aware that they were witnessing an extraordinary moment of quiet bravery. The billionaire finally spoke, attempting to regain control. "Do you think you can lecture me in my own city?" he asked, his tone sharp but lacking its usual conviction. His attempt at intimidation was now met with calm steadiness rather than fear, and it threw him off balance more than he expected. The waitress didn't flinch. She simply nodded politely, keeping her voice soft and composed. "I'm not lecturing," she said. "I'm just speaking the truth. People notice how they are treated, and it makes a bigger difference than anything else." Her sentence hung in the air, simple, yet so precise that the energy in the room shifted palpably. The silence that followed was almost tangible. Nearby diners held their breath, sensing that something remarkable had just occurred. Staff members paused in their duties, watching closely. Aware that the dynamics of the room had changed completely, the billionaire leaned back in his chair, a mixture of frustration and disbelief crossing his face. He had not expected anyone, let alone someone serving him at a restaurant, to respond in such a manner. The room seemed to constrict around the table, every pair of eyes fixed on the interaction. There was a moment when the usual hierarchy of power felt suspended, and it was clear that the waitress's courage had created an invisible shift in authority. She moved with careful grace, setting down the tray she had been holding, and maintaining eye contact without a hint of fear. "I understand your expectations," she continued, "and I will meet them, but respect is something you can't force. It comes from how you treat others." Her calm and simple words were like a mirror, reflecting his behavior back in a way he couldn't ignore. The associates at the table exchanged uneasy glances, aware that the billionaire was momentarily unbalanced. The other diners, who had been watching quietly, now felt a sense of awe. This was not a heated argument filled with shouting. It was a battle of presence, intelligence, and composure. The waitress had taken what could have been a humiliating situation and turned it into a display of dignity. Her words continued to resonate in the room. Every person present, from the guests to the staff to the other diners, could feel the weight of her courage. The billionaire finally seemed to pause, his usual confidence shaken. He had been confronted with a truth he couldn't easily dismiss, and the silence that followed was heavy with acknowledgement. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, she took a slow breath, prepared for whatever response might come next. The moment had reached its peak, and it was clear that her single sentence had already begun to change the course of the evening. The room had gone from tense anxiety to a quiet respect for the woman who had stood firm, who had spoken with clarity, courage, and dignity, and who had reminded everyone present that power was not just about wealth or fear. It was about the way you treated others. The restaurant felt different now. The tension that had filled the air for the last several minutes had shifted, but it hadn't disappeared entirely. The words of the waitress lingered in the space like a delicate but firm chord, vibrating through the ears and minds of everyone present. Even the billionaire, who had been the center of the storm, sat back in his chair, momentarily taken aback by the calm, clear truth he had just heard. His usual aura of control seemed to falter, replaced by a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and something almost like curiosity. The staff moved a little more confidently now, encouraged by the steady courage of their colleague. They exchanged small, quiet smiles behind their hands, realizing that the situation had been transformed by one person's composure. The other waitresses and waiters whispered quietly among themselves, acknowledging that they had just witnessed something remarkable. Some of the guests, who had been eating with anxious glances toward the central table, now leaned back slightly, observing the interactions with a sense of fascination. It was as though the entire restaurant had taken a collective breath, waiting to see how the billionaire would respond. The billionaire cleared his throat, his voice less sharp than before. He tried to regain his usual authority, speaking in a measured tone, but it lacked the bite it had earlier. "Well," he said slowly, "I did not expect that." His associates shifted uncomfortably, sensing the unusual power of the moment. Normally, he commanded attention effortlessly, and people followed without question. But this woman had met his anger with calm courage, and it had disrupted the usual dynamic. The waitress stood by the table, maintaining her calm, polite demeanor. She made no sudden movements, no gestures of defensiveness or apology beyond what was necessary. Her presence alone had shifted the atmosphere. She understood that the challenge wasn't simply about serving a meal. It was about standing firm, about showing dignity in a moment where she could easily have been intimidated. Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering, signaling that she had no intention of letting fear control her actions. Around the room, diners whispered in quiet tones. Some expressed admiration, some curiosity, and others amusement at the unexpected shift. A few regulars who had witnessed countless high-profile dinners in the past leaned back in their seats, shaking their heads slightly in disbelief at how one person's composure had upended what could have been a tense and unpleasant evening. The waitstaff moved with more confidence, their steps measured, aware that the room was watching the unfolding drama with growing respect for the young woman who had taken control without aggression. The billionaire rubbed his forehead and glanced at his associates, who were exchanging uneasy glances. He was accustomed to directing every conversation, controlling every moment. Yet here he was confronted by someone who refused to be controlled. His voice softened slightly, though he maintained his formal tone. "I will admit I did not expect to be spoken to in this way," he said. The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. For the first time, he had encountered someone who responded with integrity and poise, and it had disrupted his usual command of the situation. The waitress responded with a small, polite nod. "I only spoke what I felt was necessary," she said. "I hope that we can move forward in a way that allows everyone to enjoy their evening." Her voice remained calm and even, without any hint of arrogance or defiance. It was a statement that reinforced dignity and respect while maintaining professionalism. A subtle shift occurred in the billionaire's demeanor. His posture relaxed slightly, and though there was still a faint tension in his jaw, the anger that had dominated the room earlier had begun to fade. He looked around the table, perhaps reassessing his expectations and the way he had treated the staff. For a few moments, he was silent, considering the impact of her words. The other diners began to adjust their behavior as well. Conversations resumed, though quieter than before, as everyone processed the extraordinary moment they had just witnessed. Some people leaned toward their companions, discussing in hushed tones how remarkable it was that someone had spoken up with such grace in the face of a public rebuke. Others simply smiled, feeling a renewed sense of human connection and respect. The staff of the restaurant, particularly the kitchen team, exchanged subtle nods and quiet smiles. They recognized the courage it took to stand firm, to face someone so intimidating without reacting in anger or fear. The young waitress had set an example not only for her colleagues, but for the diners as well, showing that professionalism and poise could hold immense power. The manager stepped closer to the table, carefully choosing his words. "If there is anything we can do to make the rest of your evening more enjoyable, please let us know," he said politely. His tone was measured, respectful, and his presence provided support without overshadowing the quiet authority that the waitress had demonstrated. The billionaire acknowledged him with a brief nod, and the associates seemed relieved that the tension was dissipating. Despite the shift, the waitress remained focused on her role. She moved through the room with careful grace, attending to other tables while remaining aware of the central table. Her confidence was palpable, and her actions inspired a sense of calm professionalism in the staff around her. She continued to engage with other guests politely and efficiently, showing that the previous confrontation had not disrupted her ability to perform her duties. The billionaire watched her for a moment longer, a contemplative expression crossing his face. It was clear that he was processing the experience, trying to understand how someone had managed to stand so firmly and speak so powerfully without losing composure. The respect he felt was subtle but real, even if unspoken. Gradually, the other diners returned to their meals, conversations resuming with a lighter tone. The atmosphere, once thick with tension, began to feel more relaxed, though the memory of the exchange lingered in the minds of everyone present. The incident had left an impression, demonstrating the profound impact that courage, clarity, and integrity could have in any situation. The waitress continued her work, moving from table to table, her demeanor unchanged. She greeted guests with a warm smile, responded to requests efficiently, and maintained a calm and professional presence throughout. Even as she passed the billionaire's table, she maintained eye contact, conveying respect and composure without any hint of fear. Her actions reinforced the idea that she was in control of herself and her response. Regardless of the circumstances, the evening progressed smoothly, a stark contrast to the tense start. The billionaire's demeanor softened further, and he interacted with his companions more quietly and thoughtfully. The staff continued their duties with renewed confidence, inspired by the example of the waitress. Diners returned to their conversations, now with a sense of admiration and perhaps a reminder that strength often comes from calm composure rather than loud authority. By the time the evening was drawing to a close, the incident had already begun to ripple beyond the immediate room. Staff members quietly acknowledged the courage and professionalism of the young waitress, recognizing the lessons in patience, poise, and self-control that she had demonstrated. The billionaire, though wealthy and powerful, had experienced firsthand the power of respect and the subtle strength of words delivered with calm conviction. The waitress reflected on the evening as she continued her work. Aware that she had navigated a delicate and potentially explosive situation with grace, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not from confrontation, but from maintaining integrity, professionalism, and human dignity in the face of intimidation. Her actions had left an impact not only on the billionaire and his associates, but on everyone in the restaurant. As the night came to a close, the staff began their closing routines, cleaning and organizing with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The diners left one by one, some with smiles, some with quiet admiration, and some discussing the unforgettable display of courage and calm that they had witnessed. The atmosphere was lighter now, filled with the normal hum of a restaurant that had hosted an extraordinary moment within its walls. The young waitress finally took a deep breath, allowing herself a small, private moment of relief. She had faced an intimidating situation, navigated it with clarity and courage, and emerged with her dignity intact. The experience had reinforced her belief in the power of composure, patience, and thoughtful words. It was a lesson she would carry with her long after the evening ended, a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, strength and respect could shine through. The billionaire left the restaurant with a thoughtful expression, perhaps reflecting on what had just occurred. Though his wealth and status were unquestionable, he had encountered something far less tangible, but equally powerful, an unwavering confidence and dignity that had left an impression on him and everyone else present. The evening ended not with anger or humiliation, but with a sense of quiet respect, the kind that lingers long after the moment has passed. The evening gradually came to an end, and the restaurant returned to its usual rhythm. Yet, the memory of the confrontation between the billionaire and the young waitress lingered in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. What had started as a tense and uncomfortable encounter had transformed into a lesson in dignity, courage, and respect. The power of words spoken calmly and thoughtfully had created ripples far beyond the central table, leaving a lasting impression on the staff, the diners, and even the billionaire himself. The young waitress continued her duties with the same professionalism and poise she had maintained throughout the evening. Every gesture, every step she took, exuded quiet confidence. She moved through the restaurant efficiently, attending to the remaining guests, checking on drinks, and collecting plates. Her colleagues watched her with admiration, recognizing the strength it took to navigate such a high-pressure situation with grace. They exchanged subtle nods and quiet smiles, silently acknowledging her courage and composure. Word of the incident began to spread quickly, first among the restaurant staff and then to the regular patrons who frequented the establishment. Conversations circulated about the young waitress who had stood firm in the face of anger and intimidation, speaking words that had shifted the energy of the room. Some guests recounted the story to friends, describing the remarkable calm and intelligence she had displayed. The story took on a life of its own, inspiring those who heard it and reminding them that courage and respect could hold immense power even in the most challenging situations. Back in the kitchen, the chefs and assistants reflected on what had just occurred. They had watched the interaction from a distance, aware of the tension, but amazed at how the waitress had handled it. It was more than just professional skill. It was a demonstration of human strength, a quiet yet powerful assertion of dignity. The team discussed how rare it was to see someone maintain such composure under pressure, especially in the presence of a person known for commanding authority through intimidation. The manager took a moment to speak with the young waitress privately. He praised her professionalism and her ability to handle the situation with grace. "You didn't just serve food tonight," he said quietly. "You taught a lesson in patience, courage, and respect. Everyone in this restaurant witnessed something remarkable." The young waitress smiled modestly, acknowledging the compliment but remaining humble. She knew the importance of maintaining humility, even when one had done something extraordinary. She understood that the strength of her actions lay not in seeking recognition, but in standing firm and doing what was right. Meanwhile, the billionaire left the restaurant, accompanied by his associates. His expression was contemplative, a mixture of thoughtfulness and reflection. For someone accustomed to having control and authority, he had just encountered a situation that challenged his expectations. The young waitress had responded with calm intelligence and courage, qualities that he rarely faced in a public setting. Her words had stayed with him, resonating in a way that he could not dismiss. He found himself reflecting on the interaction, considering the impact of respect and human dignity in a way he had rarely allowed himself to do. As the news of the evening's events spread beyond the restaurant, people on social media and local news platforms began to share the story. Accounts of the young waitress's calm courage went viral, capturing the imagination of a wide audience. People praised her ability to remain composed in the face of intimidation, noting how she had managed to shift the dynamics of a tense situation without aggression. The story became a reminder that power did not always come from wealth or authority, but from integrity, confidence, and the courage to speak the truth respectfully. The young waitress's life began to change subtly in the days that followed. While she continued her work at the restaurant with the same dedication and professionalism, she found that she had gained a newfound sense of confidence. Colleagues treated her with even greater respect, recognizing her ability to handle high-pressure situations with grace. Regular patrons greeted her warmly, expressing admiration for how she had navigated an intimidating encounter. The experience reinforced her belief in the importance of maintaining composure, integrity, and respect, no matter the circumstances. The restaurant itself benefited from the incident as well. Word spread about the young waitress who had stood firm, and more guests were drawn to the establishment, curious to witness the professionalism and human dignity that had become part of its story. The staff felt a renewed sense of pride in their work, inspired by the example set by their colleague. It was a reminder that even in a world that often celebrated wealth and power, qualities such as courage, respect, and composure could have a profound and lasting impact. The young waitress continued to carry herself with the same poise and humility, knowing that the strength she had demonstrated was not about seeking recognition, but about standing firm in her principles. She understood that moments like these were rare and that true courage was often quiet, subtle, and unassuming. Her actions had not only influenced the billionaire and his associates, but had also created a ripple effect, inspiring those around her and leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. In the weeks that followed, the story of the encounter became a symbol of the power of dignity and courage. People discussed how a single individual could influence an entire room through composure, respect, and thoughtful words. The young waitress's example reminded everyone that true strength did not always come from wealth or authority, but from the confidence to stand by one's values and treat others with respect. Her actions became a benchmark for professionalism, grace, and human integrity. The billionaire, though returning to his usual life, carried the memory of the evening with him. He reflected on the young waitress's words and the calm authority she had displayed. It was a lesson that went beyond the restaurant, a reminder of the subtle yet powerful influence of respect and courage. He had encountered someone who had challenged his assumptions and reminded him that true strength often lay in the quiet dignity of character. The young waitress, meanwhile, continued to work with dedication and care. Each day brought new challenges, but the experience had strengthened her resolve and reinforced her belief in the importance of integrity and professionalism. She knew that her ability to remain calm and composed, even in the face of intimidation, was a quality that would serve her throughout her life and career. Her courage had left an indelible mark, not only on the billionaire, but on everyone who had witnessed her stand firm with dignity. As the restaurant settled into its normal rhythm, the story of the evening remained alive in the memories of those who had been there. It was a story of courage, respect, and the quiet power of composure. The young waitress had shown that one person's actions could influence an entire environment, leaving a lasting impression on colleagues, patrons, and even the most powerful individuals. Her example was a testament to the enduring impact of integrity, courage, and the human capacity to face challenges with grace and dignity. The night ended with a sense of quiet fulfillment for the young waitress. She had navigated a difficult and intimidating situation with professionalism and courage, and in doing so, she had created a lasting influence that extended far beyond the walls of the restaurant. Her actions had shown that respect, composure, and integrity were qualities that could inspire, teach, and transform. The story of her courage became a lasting reminder of the human potential to face challenges with dignity, to speak truth with calm authority, and to leave a positive mark on the lives of those around us.